few memories for the Sutherland family reunion in Nelson, February 2014. There it is. I've got a list of a few stories, won't take long. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I have first memories of Blenheim, and our father, Dad, there was a member of the Blenheim pipe band and was a drummer in it. And I remember whenever going to see the band marching and playing, the drum major, is it, out in front with his great big long staff, throwing it seemed like about 30 feet up in the air, turning, and as it came down on the march, he'd catch it and carry on and do it again. And I can certainly remember that, fascinated by it. Now, in Blenheim there, one day Ronald, I think it was, asked Ron, he was playing with Neil down through our orchard. We had an orchard at 50 yards long, and at the end of it was a creek full of weeds, and he was down there with Neil. And anyhow, suddenly Ron comes tearing up to the house yelling for Mum, "Neil's in the creek, Neil's fallen in the creek." And on that particular day, Lloyd happened to be home, sick in bed, most probably with the flu. And hearing this, unbeknown to everyone, he just jumped out his bedroom window in his pyjamas, ran all the way down through the orchard and flew off the bank and into the middle of the river where Neil was clinging to some weeds that were growing near the surface of the river. And talking about the orchard, a lot of fruit in there which used to get the attention of the local youth. They were always in there pinching apples, and I remember one day Dad decided to do something about this, and he got his shotgun and walked down there in the dark and on dusk, that's when they used to turn up, and put a blank cartridge in it and got in the middle of the orchard and pulled the trigger. And with a mighty boom, there were kids running in all directions, some yelling, "Don't shoot me," and within 10 seconds they'd all disappeared. And I don't know if they ever came back, but they certainly got a fright. Across the road from our house in Blenheim was Waterley Park, and one fine day, all of a sudden the Blenheim Fire Brigade drove in their great big vehicle and wanted to talk to Mr. Sutherland, which they duly did, and they told him that the haystack in Waterley Park had caught fire and burnt out, and they'd been called out to put the fire out. And the conversation didn't go too well when Mr. Sutherland's boys got the blame, and he ordered them off the property. Anyhow, I think it was 30 years, 40 years later, in a little reunion where we were having talks, Richard came out with the truth and took ownership of having set the haystack on fire. From Blenheim we shifted to Rye Valley on that farm, and I think it was the happiest time of Mum and Dad's life. And I remember years ago Mum telling me about her and Dad used to go out and put gelignite in the stumps, in the paddocks, so the stumps were left there, and then I'd run for cover and hide and blow these stumps up with a mighty bang, and wood flying all over the place. And I really think it was the happiest time of their life. But the thing I remember about Rye Valley was something that I was involved in. And I became aware that Donald and Richard were building a hut in the pine plantation. Lots of trees there, all professionally planted in rows, and had been trimmed and growing tall. And they wouldn't let me get involved and help them or go anywhere near this hut. So after some weeks, I suppose, when they'd got it finished, I decided to, when they weren't watching, to go and investigate, which I did. And the hut was built of wood, 4 sides, roof on the top, all of timber, and crawled through a little opening down the passageway on one wall and then into the room. And heavens, what do I find in the room? Box of matches. I look a bit closer and find a packet of black and white roll your own tobacco. And I knew where that came from. Dad used to buy it in packs. And also some of the zigzag papers to roll the cigarette in. And I was quite peeved about this. They're not letting me join in with their smoking. So I gathered some of the nice dry pine needles in a pile in this hut. Yes, got the matches out and set fire to it. Well, it wasn't long before the smoke was coming out through the top of the pine trees, and I remember Richard chasing me all through those pine trees, and he did catch up with me, and when he caught up with me, he thumped me a beaut. And anyhow, the trees were saved, the fire was put out, and I was too frightened to tell Dad about where his tobacco was going. Could have cost a lot of money burning that plantation of pines down when I look back now. The coming up our little valley, there was a valley that went off to the left, and then we carried on and went to where our house was, and the Melbourne sheds and everything. And there's a creek that came down there, a nice stony creek, and I remember being with Donald and Richard again, and we came across this wild sow with half a dozen piglets in tow, and my older brothers chased them and caught one, yelled out for me to come, and I to sit on it while they went and tried catching another. They did. They caught another one, and we ended up with 2. And just as all this was over, one of the neighbour farmers came driving up the road, up this valley, I don't know for what reason, and got offered one of the pigs by Donald and Richard, and so we went home with one pig. And when of course the story got told to Mum and Dad, you could see they were looking at each other and say, why didn't you bring 2 home? But that's where we lived. It was a little bit in the wilds out there, and at the same creek, in the very same area, I remember being down there by myself. Don't know how old I'd be, 6, 7, something like that, and playing around in the creek, lifting boulders up, looking for cockabullies or crawlers, and all of a sudden I heard a noise just in the creek right opposite me there, on the other side of the creek, about 2 yards away, and I looked up, and here was this stag you know, horns up, antlers, and water dripping out of his mouth. He just raised his head out of the stream after having a drink. And we looked at each other about 2 yards apart. And then he just turned around and walked into the pig fern that went on up the hill. And he just walked away, not scared, not running, just slowly. And to remember that to this day, it was great. Also in the creeks there, Richard made a friend at the local school, Rye Valley, and he came and stayed a weekend or a couple of weekends from time to time, and he was called Tinny, and his surname was Arnold, so he was called Tinny Arnold, and the reason he was called Tinny was everything used to fall into place for him, especially when he played football. But, you know, he was always there to get the ball to score the try and all. And whenever they came out, whenever he came out, him and Richard used to spend hours in the creek with their slug guns, and they'd pull up the stones looking for the cockabullies and they'd shooting them through the top of the water. It's only so deep. And it wasn't until years later that I remember ringing Richard up, and lived in Christchurch this time, and said, I think it was in Christchurch, I don't know where it was, but Derek Arnold, the first five, just been selected for the All Blacks. Remember him? And I had to remind Richard that was his mate, Tinny Arnold. He was still Tinny playing for the All Blacks. Very clever and fleet-footed first five. Lloyd, sometimes he used to, Dad had bought a brand new truck and got the deck put on it and got the contract from the milk factory at Rye Valley, and had the contract to pick up all the milk or cream cans that farmers put out on, every morning after milking, and as he went down the valley, pick them up, take them to the factory. And anyhow, Lloyd did this as well for him sometimes, and I remember on one occasion I went with Lloyd and collected all the cans, delivered them, and on the way back he stopped at Hubbard's place, and which was right on the edge of the main Puri River, which is a big river, and they had a swing bridge across it, and he stripped off his clothes, had his togs on underneath, and he climbed out into the middle of the swing bridge, up on the edge of it, and dived in. And I'm standing there or sitting in the truck watching, because I went with him this particular day, and quite a way up, and went right down and into the water and up, swam to the side of the river, beautiful river. You could see the bottom way below with all the stones, and climbed up the bank, dried himself off into the truck and drove home again. I never thought to ask him why he did it, but I think he did it because it was there. Our phone, those days we had party lines, and everyone had a sort of a Morse code signal, and you could be short, long, short, or you could have short, short, two longs, or short, long, short. And when you rang up, you had it must have had a generator in it. You had the handle where you used to short, long, short, and the person who would hear it would say, "Oh, that's my signal," and ring it up, and you'd talk to your neighbours. You young ones would. It'll be something new you've most probably learnt today. But the other thing, there used to be the wiring must have got hit with lightning in a storm one day and travelled down the wire into the house, and there was two fuses, fake light fuses about this long, right up where the ceiling is, and they burst out of their holder and flew around. I remember flying around the room until they lost their momentum and crashed to the floor, which was quite scary at the time. There was death in the Rye Valley, and this particular day, doing the milk run with Dad, and we'd gone into the Rye Valley, delivered it all, and came back out and found 2 or 3 cars parked on the side of a road by one of our neighbours, and Dad told me to stay in the truck, and he hopped out and walked across the paddock where you could see these people in the distance, and I sat there, and after half an hour or so I saw them come walking back towards the cars, and they'd found some planks or timber, and they had their coats on this timber covering up the body of our neighbour, who had been out on a frosty morning in his tractor, and the tractor had rolled and he was underneath it. And it was only a few weeks before that I was at their place going to a kiddie's birthday. They had a daughter who was in the same class as me at school, and playing musical chairs is one of the things. Don't know if kids still play musical chairs. You might start off with 7 kids and you have 6 chairs, play the music. When the music stops, you all got to sit down. The person who misses out loses, and you do it again, 1 less chair, and then you miss out until you end up with 1 winner who wins the cake of chocolate or whatever it was. Now, the cow shed used to generate a bit of emotion. I don't know whether this was you, John, or Dad, or whether it was both of you, but the cows those days used to be pretty wild, and some of them, whenever you put the cups on them when you're milking them, would immediately push them off somehow, and they'd continually lose their tails to flick you over the head. And anyhow, whoever it was lost their temper on this particular day when I was standing there watching, picked up a 4x2 and knocked this cow over the head, right between the horns, and his feet just went and down he went. He managed to get up straight away, but he was a bit groggy, but it diffused a bit of anger in whoever it was. John also can fill you in on some of the stories about catching the bus to go to school in the morning. He might have missed the bus with Neil or whatever, but whenever we were going to miss the bus, John, when you were doubling me, it never really happened in the end. We always seemed to catch it. But I know there was a bit of bus missing going on there. Then we went to Nelson. Mum used to go to the Presbyterian church on Sundays, and Donald, Richard and Neil and I got enrolled in Sunday school. And the 2 elder ones used to double us younger ones on their bike in our Sunday best, but we wouldn't end up at the church. We'd end up down the Queen's Gardens, spend an hour watching the ducks swimming around and enjoying the beautiful Nelson Queen's Gardens, and then they'd double us home again. And shows you the influence that siblings can have on one another. They stopped me from smoking, wouldn't let me in their hut, and they stopped me from being impressed at an early age with religion. I look at that as a positive. And things go round in circles. Neil and I had a hut in Nelson, up the hill where we lived in the gorse, and there was a packet of black and white tobacco again, and matches, and with Bill Humphreys most probably. He was a neighbour. And we had our 2 or 3 cigarettes. Made me feel sick. I didn't like it. And I don't think Neil liked it. He never smoked, and that was it. I don't know whether Dad realised where another one of his packets of black and white went to, but that didn't last long with us. Well, there's 1 or 2 sayings that just spring to mind. It's been a broad moonlit night tonight. Remember, okay, I've said it wrong, but remember something like that? And yeah, and also, don't get angry, or I'll give you one, and you'll think it's twa. You know what that means? I'll give you 1 and you'll think it's 2. Have a happy reunion.